Okay, well, welcome to Central Teaching. I think you guys all know me, but my name's Todd Stewart. We're going to be doing this fall, we're going to be doing a series on the Good Shepherd, experiencing God's timeless direction and care in our contemporary setting. Before we pray, I just want to talk about the goals of this series. The first big goal is to understand how God has revealed his heart for people through the Good Shepherd imagery. And this imagery really we'll be tracing it on over 1,000 year journey from Psalm 23 all the way up to First Peter 5. Um, so yeah, we won't do that all today, but we'll be doing that this semester. And the second goal is not only to understand, we got to understand first what God's wanting to communicate, why he hones in so much on the Good Shepherd imagery. We need to understand that in its original setting. It can't mean to us what it didn't mean to the original audience. So we're going to do our best to try to understand that. But we also want to experience God's timeless direction and care in our contemporary setting, us, right now. Because the deal is, God still is, the claim of the scriptures is, God still is the good shepherd. And he invites us to trust him as that good shepherd right now, today. So, in our real world. So, a few of you guys want to pray, that'd be awesome. Then I'll walk us through. We're going to be studying Psalm 23 today. If you want to open up to that, you're welcome to read ahead on it. The way I like to do things, especially with the Psalms, take it line by line or thought by thought, because that's really how they're intended to be read. Originally, they actually weren't read by the audiences. They heard it read slowly and they would think about it. So it's a very auditory culture. So yeah, we'll try to do that. Of course, you're free to open your passage, your copy of the scriptures to them if you want, but they'll all be on the screen, and it might be kind of cool just to let it unfold. Probably, maybe the most popular psalm that there is, read all the time. The Lord is my shepherd. You probably a lot of people could finish the line. Shall not want. I do not lack. So it's a special challenge with passages like that to really go back and really consider what it's actually saying instead of zone out. The Lord's Prayer tends to be that way as well. So we're going to try to take it line by line, try to understand it, and see if there's some misunderstandings we have so that we can better experience God's timeless direction today. Okay, enough of that. Let's pray. A few of you guys want to pray. I'll close this, then we'll dive in.
I think for a really beautiful weekend to kind of relax our minds and our bodies for a really good start to a really fun series about how you are calm and inviting.
Yeah, I'm really excited to study you as a shepherd and connect our hearts to you and thank you so much that we get the chance to listen and hear your word this morning.
Yeah, thank you for seeing fit to preserve largely through the nation of Israel, but also through the church, preserve the scriptures for us. And the claim of the scriptures is that you chose to reveal yourself. You didn't have to, but you chose to reveal yourself to us, and you're still wanting to reveal yourself to us today. So help us meet you individually and corporately right where we are. Amen. Okay, so 9 key passages covering over 1,000 years. These are the ones we're going to study throughout the semester. The teaching rhythm roughly is going to be every other week. There will be a teaching. In between weeks, there will be other things. So I'm doing Psalm 23 today. You can see the rest there if you want. Really helpful book that's guiding me and will guide Jason when he teaches as well is by this guy, Kenneth Bailey. You see there, you can see the subtitle, 1,000 Year Journey from Psalm 23 to the New Testament. He He's passed away now, but he was a scholar, biblical scholar of the highest rank. And he lived and taught at seminaries in the East, in the Middle East. And so, what he's really good at, in my opinion, is helping us see how ancient Near Eastern or current Middle Eastern culture receive and understand the scriptures. He wrote probably his most famous book is Jesus Through Middle Eastern Eyes, if you've heard of that. Super helpful book. If you were at the winter retreat last year, I taught about the prodigal and was very much helped by his study on the prodigal Luke 15. So this is what we're doing. We aren't going to be getting any particular guidance from this guy, Walter White. But how many of you have seen Breaking Bad? So great. Most everybody says one of the best TV series ever. I thought it was really good. We're going to study all these passages about the Good Shepherd because they all build on one another. So imagine if you've seen Breaking Bad, there's 5 seasons, somebody shows up, starts watching Breaking Bad in season 5. They just enter, they know nothing else about it. They would probably enjoy the show, maybe, but there's a limited ability to understand the depth of what's going on, even in the character Walter White, just by showing up in season 5, any episode. So we can pick up and read Luke 15 or 1 Peter 5 or whatever, and we can understand that, and it's helpful, but it really gets a lot better and more rich when we understand all the backdrop, all the setup, all the prior episodes leading up to those passages. And so that's what we're going to try to do. So Bailey says it this way. He says, each of the episodes of the Good Shepherd story needs to be studied in the light of what has come before on the same topic. So let's jump in. Let's read through the whole thing. This is Bailey's translation, and you'll notice some of it is going to be slightly different than maybe what you've memorized or used to. But I will hopefully explain that as we go. Okay, so here we go. The Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. He settles me down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. He brings me back. That's a big change or a subtle change. He leads me along the right paths for his name's sake. Even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no danger or evil. For you are with me. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil. My cup overflows. Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Before we go line by line and try to understand this, I want to roll out for you there's a structure going on here that helps us understand the meaning, the big point of the psalm. So generally, this is obviously, you know, outline note version of it. It's what, if you really like getting into technical terms, it's often called step parallelism. Some people call it chiastic structure, named after the Greek word or Greek letter chi, which is like an X. This isn't exactly that. You could also call it ring composition. So you have one ring, then you have another ring and another ring, and you keep going towards the center. Uh, so one thing I want to draw your attention to, we tend to still think real linear in the West, and that's totally fine. But a lot of the scriptures and this psalm is not really written in a linear fashion. It's rolling out some big points, and there's some parallel big points on the other side as you walk through the psalm. And the punchline is not at the end, oftentimes in some of these passages. The punchline is often in the middle. The other thing I would say is this psalm is not so much a rational argument leading towards one final conclusion as much as it is a diamond into which you look and see all sorts of facets of who God is, what he's like. So today I'm not going to be like, okay, here's the one conclusion. I think there's one big idea, and I'll show you that in a second. I'm not going to point out, hey, this is the one way you have to apply this. This psalm is so rich. What I invite you to do is enter in and see how it's really resonating with you today. So, anyway, back to this. Verse 1, the big idea is that he shepherds, he leads us. We'll see in a little bit. That means he leads from the front. There aren't, therefore, we don't have any wants or needs. He provides, he gives us sustenance. He rescues us, he gives us a sense of security. Then we click over, or literally I clicked, we move over to the latter half of verse 4. He comforts us, he provides that security. See the parallel thought with verse 3. He provides super abundantly beyond what we could ever imagine. That's the table in the midst of our enemies and all that stuff. Again, that theme of provision in hostile territory. And then the psalm ends with he follows us. His goodness and mercy follows us, just like he goes before us as the shepherd and we follow, trusting him. His goodness and mercy come behind us as well. And in the middle, smack dab in the middle of the psalm is really the big idea, which is therefore, because God is like this, if we get to know this God, I couldn't cry for 15 years now. Every time I talk about the word, I cry. There is no fear. There's no fear of the ultimate enemy, death. There's no fear of evil. And if you struggle at all with anxiety, like I do, the most present struggle with fear is shadows. I don't literally mean shadows, but I mean anticipatory anxiety, being anxious about being anxious. What might happen? This is all in the Psalm. So it speaks to us. I mean, this is an old passage. But man, it is good for you and me right now. So that's the structure. Let's get into it. First line says this: the Lord is my shepherd. I shall not want. This, right out of the chute, for the original audience would be like, whoa, this is unusual because they're a communal society. David was the shepherd, so David's the author. I guess I should have said that. He is drawing on his experience shepherding sheep to talk that sheep exist in a flock. I mean, it matches Near or Eastern society. Everything is communal, thinking about the collective primarily. So for David to draw attention to this idea that the Lord is my shepherd, as me, the individual sheep, is immediately unusual to them. Because, yeah, talking that way, no sheep's ever taken out to pasture alone, because it would be totally ineffective, prohibitive for cost. So there's a surrounding flock that is assumed. The audience would know this. It's not just individualistic Western culture going on here. So read this, assuming David's talking about himself and God, us and God, but he's talking about us within also a flock. We've got to know that because it informs some of the crazy actions that God takes on our behalf. Okay? Yeah, so I already said that. We'll move on. The Lord is my shepherd, I shall not want. Right there. Meaningful to that culture, for sure. I think super meaningful to our culture. Why do I say that? Because I would argue our society is largely built upon being driven forward collectively and individually in a state of constant wanting. That's what our economy is built upon. If we all stopped wanting so much, what the heck would happen with the economy? It'd be a struggle. We're in a hyper individualistic, self absorbed, dissatisfaction state of being. And so, right there, we don't need to go any further than verse 1. And many days in my life, especially the last few years, I haven't gone any further than verse 1. It's like, okay, I want to experience a life without lack or not wanting. That means I've got to be trusting the Lord as my shepherd. How can I trust him? Well, that's what the Psalm's going to help us see, because the Lord's strong and tender leadership brings deep satisfaction. Okay, that was verse 1. He settles, this shepherd settles me down in green pastures. He leads me beside still waters. So this phrase here, a lot of translations don't put it this way. I think it really is rich to understand it this way. And this is more accurate to the original. He settles me down in green pastures. Oh my goodness. So sheep, I don't know diddly about sheep other than what I read about them. They're nice furry, or what would they be called? Furry? What's the sheep's woolly? Woolly animals? They're innately, so we probably, most of us know this, but it's good to remember they're innately fearful, skittish creatures. I have discovered more in the last, especially 3 years of my life. I never would have said I was, but I am innately fearful and skittish. I am now fully convinced of that most of the time. The Lord settles us down. So that's, you need to read it as it's not just settling us down, just generally. He settles us down in spite of our anxieties and fears. See, some of this, like, I could give you application points, but I'm going to let you kind of ponder that. I figure there's enough there for those who have ears to hear. Let them hear. He settles me down, not just anywhere, he settles me down in green pastures. So again, original audience, original setting. At the very most, green pastures were and are available in the Holy Land for 3 months. What does that mean? It means green pastures are rare, very rare. They are the delight, the longed for state of existence for a sheep. From all the sheep we've interviewed, that's what they've said. We just assume that's the case. The Lord is the one. So, I go through life trying to find my own version of green pastures. I define it in various ways by the day, but it usually comes down to things going the way I want them to go. Life is comfortable, life is predictable, life is convenient. So I don't have to live fearful of actual things or worked up with my anticipatory anxieties. That's that's the life I've been looking for my whole life, really, if I'm in my flesh apart from trusting God. Well, the Lord is the one. Todd hunts, Todd looks for his green pastures, but the Lord, the claim of this psalm is the Lord is the one who knows how to lead us to delightful, succulent, green pastures for our souls. By the way, I intended to say this initially. So, um, in terms of evidence for God, Jesus, etc., there's all sorts of evidence. And if you're pondering whether to follow Jesus, I encourage you to investigate whatever evidence you feel like you need. There's scientific arguments for the existence of God. There's the philosophical arguments. There's arguments about the reliability of the Bible, predictive prophecy, all sorts of things like that. Those all have power and impact and have impacted me deeply. One of the things, though, one of the subtle forms of evidence that I think this psalm puts before us is God revealing himself as exactly what we deeply long for. That is a form of evidence that got beyond some of my big questions that were really hard to answer when I was 20 and arguing and searching and all that. What I started to do is, in addition to investigating all these, what I thought were really big questions, I started reading the Gospels, and all of a sudden I started falling in love with this. Well, falling in love is probably too strong. I started being really intrigued by this Jesus guy. It's like, I don't know. I don't even know if this is reliable. Is this trustworthy? Is this fairy tales? If it's fairy tales, this is a damn good fairy tale, and I really want to follow the one who is the hero of the story. So consider that as you're going through this as well. This is a subtle but powerful form of evidence. What does your heart long for in your darkest moments or your most difficult moments? I think God reveals himself as at least my heart's cry. So anyway, that's a side note. I intended to say that earlier, but It's what I feel happening as I'm teaching it, so I wanted to say it. So he settles me down in these green, succulent pastures. He leads me beside still waters. Now, I've already referred to this, but I want to overtly draw our attention to it. The skittish, fearful sheep is not cow. They're not cattle. They're not driven along from the rear. Sheep won't be led unless they are led from the front. Sheep follow based off of trust. So, this is a powerful picture. The Lord leads us. He woos us. Really, that's how shepherds lead their sheep from what I hear again. He woos us from the front. And this will be developed in great detail as we go through this series. Knowing our names, having a special voice or call that we recognize. These things are really sweet, but we won't steal all the thunder for future teachings. He woos us from the front, and we follow him because of his demonstrated trustworthiness. So, couldn't find any picture. This was the best I could find. But yeah, that's the picture of how it goes, at least in ancient Near Eastern and even modern Middle Eastern cultures. The shepherd leads from the front. Why do the sheep follow? Because they trust the shepherd. How have they learned to trust the shepherd? They've experienced the shepherd's goodness over time. He settles us down. He leads us beside still waters. So these skittish sheep, they're afraid to drink. Any type of moving water will scare the sheep. We're not talking about torrential currents and rapids. We're talking about water that's hardly flowing at all. Freaks out the sheep. So, what does the good shepherd do practically with actual sheep? The good shepherd either finds little pools and leads the sheep to those little pools, or he creates, like digs out little trenches that the water flows into so that the sheep will settle down and drink. God does that for us, is the claim here. He helps us find refreshment. Refreshment is in him, his design for us, etc. And he also, in the midst of our difficult, scared, freaked out environment, he digs a little figurative trenches for us to satisfy us. He knows what we each uniquely need. Yeah, so he does that. Bailey says this in summary of this section: with the finest food, green pastures, and water that the sheep can confidently drink, the still waters, along with the assumed freedom from any exterior threat, the sheep will lie down to digest their freshly eaten food. A shady place near quiet waters in the midst of green, succulent grass is the best of all worlds for any sheep. So that's what's being pictured here. So what we have here is a shepherd who satisfies us, provides for us in the ways that we need and can receive. He's very gentle. He doesn't whip the sheep and say, that water's not flowing too fast, you wuss, just get up there and drink it. No, he tenderly creates spots for the sheep to drink. Again, I'm going to trust you to think about what does that mean? How does that connect with you? The way God refreshes our souls typically is through communing, relating with him in prayer, his word, and with his people, talking, letting him in. Okay, so this is going to be a different than maybe how you've heard it your whole life. He brings me back. We'll just stop right there for now. He brings me back. Brings me back, if you look on your little Bible apps and all those things that everybody has these days, and you look at kind of some of the translation options, brings me back is literal. A lot of passages, like in my note-taking Bible, mine says restores my soul. It's circled. It's been circled for years. I want my soul restored, Lord. This is really good. That's a great principle. It's really true. God does restore our soul. But what the passage actually says is he brings me back. And we have to stick with that, because if we rip it out and over spiritualize it, we're going to lose something that's really going on in this text, which is at the heart of this psalm is implied and very much understood that we have a lost sheep. in our midst. He brings me back. Why does David say he brings me back? Because he's wandered. He's wandered away from the right paths, etc. So the Lord rescues the lost and troubled sheep, which is facing imminent death. So up to now, it's been the sheep being led, being part of the flock, all of that. Now there's this subtle shift. David's talking about being lost and facing imminent death. We got to understand what's the journey of a lost sheep. I interviewed a few sheep, as I referred to, and this is what they said it's like. I'm stepping on the keyboard. That would be bad. Lost sheep typically goes like this. They're initially oblivious. They don't decide I would like to be lost today and go off and risk my life like a total fool. They're initially oblivious. They're wandering, looking for something else. Suddenly, they become aware of their lostness. The flock's gone. The shepherd's not around. They then become overcome by fear and anxiety when they realize their state of being. And then they really start freaking out. They try to hide under a bush or behind a rock, usually, or just somewhere, and they start constantly quivering, shaking uncontrollably, and bleeding, whatever, bleeding uncontrollably. So they're hiding for their safety, but they're making all sorts of noise, which of course is inviting the predators, right? And so the sheep, when they figure out they're lost, they lose their minds and their ability to function. So, in that little phrase, he brings me back, is all of this imagery. It's there. Like David's like, when I am off on my own, intentionally or even unintentionally, losing my mind, out of touch with reality, overcome by my fears, real or imagined, the good shepherd finds me and he brings me back. And the sheep literally has to be brought back because the sheep it can't function, like it can't walk. It's so overcome with anxiety, fear. And so the shepherd, you've seen the images, probably the paintings, the shepherd puts the sheep around its neck, ties its hooves or whatever those things, feet together, carries it back, and then has to tenderly care for the sheep because it's got actual trauma that it's experienced. God does that for us in the midst of whatever your circumstances are. And he does this. It leads us along the right paths, restores us to the right paths, which the right paths are following the shepherd, being with the flock, following the shepherd. He does this for his namesake. The shepherd's integrity is on the line. Shepherds usually aren't shepherding their own sheep in the East. They are shepherding other people's sheep a lot. And if they develop a reputation for losing and not finding, everybody knows sheep get lost. But if you lose one and you don't find it, and that happens often enough, guess what? You're not going to be doing very long. Shepherding. So the good shepherd knows not only, oh, I care about that sheep, I need to restore it, but it's my own namesake that's on the line, my integrity. That's what's going on here. So the Lord's saying, David's saying about the Lord, he won't violate his own character by failing to rescue and restore a lost sheep. Now, especially a lost sheep in this environment, the sheep, there aren't sheep that don't want to be found. Like, there's not sheep that are like, no, I'm starting my own flock. I'm in charge here. I don't want anything to do with you, shepherd. What he's talking about here is sheep that are lost and they desperately want to be found. They're not resisting being found, they're crying out to be found. And the shepherd's going to look and find and sacrifice, leaving the flock to go find this lost sheep. And that gets developed a lot more in Luke 15, which we'll talk about later. So again, our structure, he shepherds, there's no wants. He leads us from the front. He provides that green pasture, those still waters. He rescues us when we're lost and losing our minds. And then we get to the core, the big driving point of the psalm, which is even though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, I will fear no danger or no evil, or you could even say no shadows. Yeah, the valley of the shadow of death, again, it can be translated valley of deep darkness, the valley of deepest shadow. So all of it's going on there. Probably don't need to worry too much about which one's right. I think it's the whole myriad of meaning. Bailey says this: the valley of death or deep darkness for a shepherd leading its flock to try to find the green pastures, because it's not like they're in your backyard. You got to lead the sheep on trails to find them. Valley of death or deep darkness is a section of the trail that cannot be avoided. There is no bypass road. There's no magical escape. The only way forward to the green pastures is through the valley. I experienced this some myself. This past April, I wasn't thinking about this psalm at all. But when my dad passed away, talking kind of to myself, but also to my kids and various others, it's like, the analogy I used at the time was there are some storms that are so big you can't drive around or fly around them. You've got to go through them. And this is one of those. It was a out of the blue death and everything that went with it. That's really what's being talked about here. To go follow the shepherd to the green pastures, the still waters that we long for, we have to go through difficult valleys at times. Now, here's the thing about this valley, though. This is Bailey still, often the major problem in relation to the valley, the dark valley, is the fear that it can generate. Now, this really speaks to me a lot in the way how I struggle in life. It's the fear that it can generate. Such fear can cripple the traveler long before a valley appears on the journey. The journey itself through such a valley does not destroy joy as much as the fear generated by the anticipation of the valley. Preparing to get up and teach in this environment, as many of you know, has become a challenge for me in recent years. And the thing is, it's when I'm up here, it's awesome. I enjoy it when I'm doing it, but the anticipatory anxiety there's wackadoodle stuff inside here going on. And it's a fight to not give into it. It's the fear of what might happen, how I might feel, blah, 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 blah. It's very similar for us as we go through life. Now, there's real things. Death is a real difficult thing. There's real suffering going on. But the thing I'm going to argue, generally, the thing that controls us a lot as individuals and that controls our society is anticipatory anxiety of what might happen. I might not have enough money. I might try to talk to this person, and it might, to use the word the kids use these days, it might be awkward. It's the cardinal sin that I hear about every day at Manhattan High. Awkwardness. Yeah, this fear that keeps us from being able to take action, move towards people in love, whatever. Oftentimes, the fear that controls us is anticipatory. When we're in the middle of whatever it is, oftentimes we do better than just imagining what it would be like. Yeah, so right at the heart of the psalm, because of the way the shepherd is, how he leads us, how he cares for us, how he's demonstrated his care, we don't need to live in fear of evil or death or of the shadows, those misty, anticipatory fears. Yeah, so we will fear no danger or evil. So just to remind us, first, the sheep has been paralyzed with fear because it was lost. Now the sheep is facing overwhelming fear as it approaches the dark valley that it remembers and is scared of, or maybe is in the dark valley and it actually is scary. How can David claim to not fear in such scary places? I've already alluded to this, but the punchline comes in right now. The big reason David says, I don't fear in the midst of whatever circumstances I'm in, is because you, God, are with me. Now, if some of you may have already noticed this, but this is the first time that God actually is formally on the scene in this psalm. Before it, it's talking generally about shepherds and blah, blah, blah. The Lord is my shepherd. It's an analogy, etc. But now David's addressing God, you, me and you. God bursts on the scene. His faithful presence is what frees us from our anticipatory anxieties, which is really awesome. But I'm glad the psalm doesn't stop there because that's not really enough. Like, just because God's present, what does that mean? So it goes on to say this, for you are with me, and not only are you with me, God, in my difficulties as I go through life, and the things I'm worried about that are real or imagined, your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So sheep find a lot of comfort and trust in the shepherd, not only because the shepherd is, nice and provides for them, but he protects them. Sheep have a really, really big problem. They have teeth, but they don't have teeth that amount to much. They have no defenses. They have no claws. They're not fast. They don't have porcupine needles. They're just defenseless beings. So, what kind of shepherd would fill a scared and simple sheep with comfort and peace? Imagine. Just think about it for a second. What kind of shepherd can fill a scared and simple sheep with comfort and peace? Yes, it needs to be a shepherd who cares deeply. But just caring, I mean, there's people who care a lot about things but have no power to do diddly squat about it. I'm not going to be that comforted if I've got somebody who really cares for me, but a wolf comes along, they're going to run away or get eaten by the wolf themselves. So I'm just the second course instead of the first one. So we get comfort from a shepherd who cares deeply, but also from a shepherd who can wield a big spiked club. Yeah, that's what's really going on here. Your rod and your staff, they comfort me. So the rod is kind of like that. It's kind of, if you know your Middle Eastern, or not Middle Eastern, your Middle Ages weapons, it's kind of like a mace. So that's actually not a very good, that's the best I could find on the internet. It's something kind of like that, but a rod, it's not just a stick. It's it's a thing, a big club that has shards of iron driven into it. It's something that can cause some very serious damage when wielded by somebody who knows how to use it. And that's what the shepherd knows how to do. So the sheep find comfort because they know the shepherd's there, he cares, and he knows how to wield his big stick and kick some butt. And the shepherd not only can protect him with the rod, not only cares about him, but the staff, the crooked staff, is used by the shepherd to lead and guide, literally move the sheep onto the right paths, hook them, pull them down from precarious situations. So it's the kind of shepherd that the sheep trusts. He cares, but he's also equipped and has power and the ability to actually provide and change, protect. That's what God is like for us. He's not just a little mamby-pamby carrying weenie. He cares a lot and he has the power to bring about change in your life if you will follow him as your good shepherd. That's the claim of the psalm. So some of the experience of his care is not going to happen until you take some steps, seeing if he'll deliver on what he says he's going to do. If you're considering following God, that's one thing I encourage you to do. Cry out to him and say, God, if you're there, show your care to me. Wield that big ass stick. Yeah, I knew I couldn't avoid saying it, but I did. Yeah. So this brings comfort to the sheep. Yeah, so just back to our structure so far, shepherds, he leads us from the front, provides, rescues, therefore we have no fear. Oh, and back, remember again, we have no fear because he comforts us, he provides us with security. And we're going to kind of go somewhat quickly through the last part of this because we'll develop this more when we get to Luke 15. But this says this, verse 5. You prepare a table before me in the presence of my enemies. You anoint my head with oil, my cup overflows. Now, I've read, I guess I wouldn't call them very scholarly works, honestly, that try to turn this into something that's happening for a sheep. This is just not, this doesn't fit an analogy with a shepherd and a sheep at all. It's because the analogy and it intentionally is changed here. This psalm is not just about a good shepherd. It's about God as a good shepherd, which is always male in that culture in that time. But God is also a good host, which is a female at that time. God created us in the image of himself, male and female. He created us. He shepherds, leads, cares for us, and he also provides super abundantly for us as a good host. We'll develop that more later, but please don't try to make this fit. It's a sheep having some kind of banquet out there with oil and the sheep drinking from cups. It's torturing it to get to that point. It's not what's envisioned. So, yeah, this would have been viewed as the role of a faithful woman in their culture, a good host or hostess. So, God, the big idea here is again, it fits the parallelism and the structure. God is a super abundant provider for us, even in the midst of hostile territory, which is what is said here. You prepare a table for me I can feast in the presence of my enemies. I don't need to fear. I don't need to be paralyzed. My cup overflows, in fact, not only just sustenance, but overflowing provision. Yeah, so we'll revisit this in Luke 15. That's basically what that says. So we'll move on. He's a provider. That fits with what he said in verse 2. Again, David driving home masterfully his point using uh, literary devices that sometimes are hidden from us. And then the passage ends with this: Surely goodness and mercy shall follow me all the days of my life, and I will dwell in the house of the Lord for the length of days. Length of days is a great translation because it could either be forever, like eternity, or the length of my days as I live on this earth. I think it means both. I think it means both. So length of days is great. So surely goodness and mercy are going to follow me. Remember, as I said earlier, the shepherd always leads from the front. So God leads from the front, faithfully, lovingly, caring. We follow, we experience his provision, his care. And also, I mean, it's like if I do this, I start getting nervous. Like, what the heck are you guys doing back there behind me? The statement, just think of this statement: I am being followed. Does that inspire like, oh wow, I feel comfort from it? We usually use the phrase "I'm being followed" to refer to like anxiety. Oh my Lord, what's behind me? What's going to happen? I can't see back there. Then watch all sorts of horror movies. People are being followed. They're running, sprinting. The bad person's just walking, catching up with them. That's what we envision happening in our brains. I'm being followed. So usually it's a terrifying thought to be followed, that we're being followed. But what really matters is who's doing the following. What's the being like that is following us? David's point here is you don't have to worry. You don't have to worry about what's ahead because you're following the shepherd. And you don't have to even worry about what's behind you or you can't see because God, is following us with his reliable, faithful goodness and mercy all of our days. So we can dwell securely with him for eternity and now. So God follows us with persistent goodness and mercy. As we follow God, we discover, this is summary and we're ending up here. As we follow God as the shepherd, we discover a life without lack in the deepest sense. It doesn't mean that you don't ever get hungry or thirsty or any of those things, or you don't ever have disappointments or struggles. It doesn't mean that at all, but it means on a very deep, deep, deep level in your soul, as we follow him and are able to trust him, we discover a life without lack. And God follows us as well, kind of sandwiching us, if you will, in between uh, his leadership and his goodness and mercy that follow us. So that's the psalm. That's what's being laid out being driven home by these parallel thoughts on both sides with the big idea in the middle, which is how can I live a life that's beyond fear? I'm not saying without fear is too much to say because fear is needed. There are things we do need to be afraid of. There are situations that we should feel fear. It's actually a protective mechanism that we have, and we need to sometimes trust our fears. So I'm not saying a life without fear fully, but I couldn't fit all this in the box on the screen. It's a life beyond, not controlled by fear of all types. How can we live that life? According to Psalm 23, it's by trusting and following the Good Shepherd, experiencing the good host that we barely even touched on. We will later. I want a life that's not controlled by fear. So there's a lot for me to think about in this. I think there's hopefully some things for you to think about as well.